Welcome to the Clause YouTube channel.
Together, we strive for a safer, secure, and more stable world.
You're muted, Roshan.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Clause YouTube channel Strategic Frontlines. Today we have with us two distinguished China experts, Ambassador Ashok Kantha, who was a former Indian ambassador to China, High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, Malaysia, and also the Director Institute of Chinese Studies. We welcome you, Ambassador Kantha, to this podcast.
Thank you.
We also have with us Lieutenant General Dr. S.L. Narasimham, PVSM, AVSM and BAR, VSM retired, a former member of India's National Security Advisory Board, and first Director General at the Center for Contemporary China Studies. Welcome, General Narasimham, to this podcast. Today, we are going to discuss the annual report to Congress on military and security developments, which involves China. So it's an annual report and it was recently released. And before we go further in the discussions, I would just like to flag 2-3 slides to show just the key points on which we would then discuss later on. Akashika, may I request to put this slide, please? Thank you. So the report, the first starts with China's national security, and it continues with its motto of great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation by 2049. It talks about the 3 core interests, that is the Chinese Communist Party's control, then promoting China's economic development, defending and expanding China's sovereignty and territory. As far as the military strategy is concerned, it talks about the military strategic guidelines, foundational doctrine, that is the Chinese People's Liberation Army Joint Operational Outlines. It also talks about multi-domain precision warfare, which it says that it is a core operational concept. There is a talk about militia, and especially the maritime militia has continued to increase its presence in the South China Sea, and we have seen its clashes with Philippines. China's 2027 objectives, what it says, the 3 major strategic capabilities what it wants to achieve is strategic decisive victory, strategic counterbalance, and strategic deterrence control. It also talks about China's coercion tactics, especially the reckless air maneuvers, which it does, violates the ADIZ, maritime incidents, economic coercion. And finally, it also talks about the China's thrust areas. If they have to achieve all these things, what are the areas which are going to be important from that perspective? So developing multi-domain C4ISR architecture, PLA cyber development, especially the cyber espionage, especially mission-specific intrusions, space developments, especially the satellite communications in LEO, and counter space activities with both ASAT missiles and also the orbit rendezvous which it is doing. Nuclear development, increase in the numbers and the capability to launch on warning and early warning counter strikes. There is a nuanced overseas influence operation which has been dealt in detail, and they say that the investments will take place in what they call as choke point technologies with dual use potentials, and those technologies are AI, biotechnology, quantum, advanced semiconductors, and energy. So these are just some of the important areas what it tries to highlight. So we'll start the discussion, and I would like to ask Ambassador Kantha first. With this as a background, I would like to ask you, Do you see any changes in China's perception of its external environment in terms of PLA's role in China's foreign policy, which we all know has become more exhaustive and discusses many areas, especially new areas like Oceania and Pacific Island countries, Latin America, Caribbean, Africa. And Africa, we know, is an important aspect. So, what are your first impressions about this report? And then, secondly, how is China perceiving its external environment and the region per se?
Uh, Roshan, I think before I come to that, I would like to make a couple of observations. One, that this US DoD report uh, needs to be read in conjunction with the national security strategy, which was announced by Trump administration last month. Because in many ways, the NSS 2025, which represented a paradigm shift, uh, takes a very different look on China's military power, China as an existential threat, as a systemic rival. There is a big departure compared to what we saw in first term of Trump in 2017, NSS, as well as Biden administration 2022 NSS. That background is important when we try to understand the US DoD report. Now, US DoD report, makes certain assessments about PLA's expanding nuclear, maritime, long-range strike, cyber, and space capabilities. And all this has a bearing on China's ability to project power. And in some areas, it's in continuance of what has been stated earlier in last year's military power report, for instance, on issue of China's nuclear arsenal, for instance. It's in continuation of that. So same basic conclusions are there, that by 2030 China will have 1,000 warheads, 2035 1,500. In terms of ability of PLA Navy to project power, there is this clear assessment that Navy is becoming more sophisticated, both in terms of its military hardware and its ability to reach out to further areas, its ability to sort of safeguard sea lines of communication, take up certain regional deterrence duties. Those things are there, but primarily I think focus remains first island chain. There are, of course, no other interesting comments which we can discuss later. For instance, reference which is contained in this report to Arunachal Pradesh being part of China's core interest in terms of its contested territorial claims. By and large, I'll say that this report itself is not as far-reaching as compared to national security strategy issued by Trump administration, because it's more nuts and bolts kind of report rather than one seeking to undertake a kind of fresh assessment of China's military challenge as NSS did.
You rightly pointed out about national security strategy, and of course China, it was a more exhaustive strategy, and more stress was laid on the Western Hemisphere, and which is happening, whatever is happening today. But I would now like to bring in Jal Narasimhan here. Jal Narasimhan, we know that when we talk about China's military strategy, uh, the report also says it's based on active defense, a combination of strategic defense and offensive actions. But the report now talks about updates to military strategic guidelines. And it also talks about multi domain precision warfare, calling it a core operational concept. So I want to ask you, what are your initial impressions about this report? Is there any change from the previous one, or it's the continuation of what it was there in 2024? And secondly, what are your analysis of updates to this military strategic guidelines and multi-domain precision warfare?
Firstly, thank you very much, Roshan, for getting me on this podcast. It's always a pleasure to talk to your audience. When I went through this 100 pages of this DoD report, generally this report used to be around 60 pages. Now, this time around, you see that it has gone to about 100 pages. It is actually the reverse of what the NSS did. Okay, NSS was brought down in pages, whereas this DoD report has gone up in the number of pages that we have. So this is first point I'm trying to do. Second, if you analyze the number of pages and all which have been going, you look at Taiwan. Taiwan has got about 9 pages worth of attention. Okay, corruption has got about 6 pages of coverage. But what the corruption will do to PLA is not clearly enunciated. It says it could affect the efficiency of the PLA is what the word that they have used. So to me, it appears to be a general kind of a explanation. As far as the new changes that have come into the defense aspects related to China, I don't see any major change that has been brought out by this particular report. That is one. In fact, when I went through the 100 pages, I really did not get anything new that would probably be earth-shaking as far as this DoD report is concerned. In fact, all the data that they have given are already known. In fact, those updates are actually come up, but they are already known by and large. So to that extent, this US DoD report has actually not done justice, because we all used to look for this DoD report whenever it comes to get the data and everything from. But I didn't see anything majorly new in this entire thing. That is one. That is the second issue I want to say. Third issue is they also talked about in detail about cyber capabilities of China. That is the third aspect that struck my eye when I read this. You talked about space, you talked about counter space, electronic warfare, direct energy weapons, nuclear, all of them are covered. But I didn't find anything really new. That is the point I wanted to convey in all this. The other thing is about the Taiwan contingency. If you look at it, it gives a clear, detailed kind of assessment of what the airborne core can do, what the other components of that force can do, what is the amphibious capability. Those things have come. One thing that is clearly comes out in this is the lack of amphibious capability with China. They have said in this report that China is probably trying to compensate by bringing in the commercial ships, the roll-on, roll-off kind of ships, to ensure that this happens. But in an amphibious operation scenario, this is very unlikely and very difficult to handle. It is not easy at all. So to me, it appears, though it talks about 2027, 2035, and 2049, one thing clearly comes out of these timelines is that 2027 is not the timeline that they are looking at to complete the modernization. If you read the explanation that they're given for 27, 35, and 49, the completion of modernization is going to take place around 35, which they had planned earlier. That is one thing that comes out very clearly. By 2049, of course, they say that they'll be the world's most modern military. That I'm sure that they've done. The next point that I want to cover is the quantum capabilities. There is a large coverage of quantum capability that they have, but again, they have not gone into the details of it. They have just said that the Suhungshid 3, that quantum computer that they are trying to make has been mentioned, but the capabilities and all have not clearly come out in this. In other publications, you see that, it has come out with 176 qubits and other things have been covered, whereas this particular report covers it in generic terms. So this report generally gives what is there in the Chinese thing in the last about a year plus, but I didn't see anything majorly different or majorly important that has come out of this report.
Ambassador Kantha, the report details China's global influence tactics. It talks about its techniques and procedures, what China does, and how it does it. It talks about the diplomatic messaging, the intelligence service, how it is doing the influence operations, the various military exercises, information operations. So, can you elaborate a little bit more of these tactics and techniques, and what should India do?
Roshan, before I come to that, let me just reinforce, a couple of points General Narasimham made about PLA objectives in 2027. Because as you know, earlier US defense leadership has sought to project that somehow 2027 is the D-Day, potential D-Day for Chinese PLA undertaking, a major kinetic action against Taiwan, possibly an amphibious invasion of Taiwan. We don't see that kind of, talk any longer in the latest US DoD report. It only says that 2027 is a near-term milestone in Chinese PLA's journey to move towards world-class force status by mid-century, where 2035 is another important milestone. So it talks about, how PLA is expected to prioritize force readiness and operational capabilities that will enable it to carry out sustained coercion and power projection within the first island chain and to extend its reach beyond it. I mean, that's the only indication that within first island chain, it can carry out, operations vis-a-vis Taiwan, for instance. And also, the focus on accelerating incorporation of advanced technologies, strengthening strategic deterrence. That's one aspect which has been highlighted quite a bit in this report in terms of 2027 milestone. And some of these things, while they may not be exactly new, in some case, in fact, as I mentioned, it might amount to a bit of backtracking on part of US defense establishment. But these developments have a great deal of significance for us because clearly, it indicates US assessment about ability of the Chinese PLA to bring about faster reinforcement, its sustainment of forward forces, improved ISR capabilities, a whole lot of these capabilities which are coming up in a sort of rapid mode. And all this has implications for our own deterrence dynamics vis-a-vis China. I think we need to bear that in mind. Of course, that's not discussed in the DoD report, but in our understanding of what is put out in the report, I think we need to take note of that. Coming to your question, Roshan, here again, my feeling is that, as Narasimham mentioned, these are all things which are being talked about. Influence operations. China is using multiple tools, partly to project its influence, and this is not just being done in a regional setting. I think that's one point we need to bear in mind, that it's being done globally. And if you look at what has happened in Venezuela, over the last few days, clearly a major target was China and its ability to sort of project its influence in Latin America and Western Hemisphere, which Trump administration believes is its number one priority. But in terms of influence operations, in terms of normalization of its activities in new domains, these are existing trends which have been highlighted in the report. Nonetheless, they're important for us because this is how China has been progressing. They try to sort of position the advances being made by them as gradual and normal, rather than something which is startling, which should cause concern. In a way, the approach is like that of inoculation. You introduce some germ in the body gets used to it. So they're trying to do that and doing it rather successfully, in fact.
Jal Narasimhan, Ambassador Kantha spoke about China is building its capabilities rapidly. And one of the factors what we can talk about is the defense budget. Their defense budget has constantly increased. In 2024, the budget was 231 billion, but they spent more than that, about 304 to 377 billion, which is about 32 to 63% higher, as the report says. And it is visible in kind of research they are doing, the kind of procurements they are doing. They are leading in hypersonic missiles, HQ-9 anti-ballistic missiles. As far as Air Force is there, they are having the they are trying to have the sixth generation combat aircraft. J-35 is there. In the Navy, they are trying to have new aircraft carriers, corvettes, destroyers. In the nuclear field, they are trying to have ICBMs. The numbers are increasing. And as you rightly pointed out, in AI and quantum, they have a niche already. And the investment in choke point technologies with dual use potential, especially AI, biotech, and advanced semiconductors, is a good sign as far as they are concerned. So my question is, what will be its impact on India? And secondly, what has been the modernization trend in terms of weapon acquisition and doctrinal concept also, which will impact, especially as far as the army and space and other areas are concerned?
This report talks about a few issues as far as the question that you asked. One is about the defense budget. They have said their defense spending last year was $304 to $377 billion. Now, that is a large approximation. That's an approximation equivalent to almost our defense budget. Okay. But their announced defense budget is $231 billion. Okay. So there is a increase from what the announced defense budget is that everybody knows. My own assessment has been they spend about 50 to 60% more than the announced defense budget every year. So it conforms to that kind of an expenditure which they have quoted. That is one. What they have also said, by 2030, when the GDP goes down to about 3 to 4%, then the defense spending may come down. But my own assessment is it is not going to come down. It will continue to increase. They may probably adjust somewhere else, but the defense budget is not going to get reduced as this report is expecting. My own reading is it will continue to be on the growth path as it has been in the last about 2 decades. So that is the second point on that. Third is the point about the talent acquisition. They are talking about talent acquisition to cover whatever you have mentioned in the scientific development, etc. As I have been saying elsewhere also, there are about 240 talent acquisition programs running simultaneously in China today. In fact, last month when I was in China, when we went through the immigration, there's a separate counter for technically qualified personnel as immigration. They have given this K visa and other things which are coming in. So they have opened a separate counter for technically qualified personnel. So they are into big way attracting talent from all across the world. That is the other point that we need to keep in mind. The other thing you mentioned about 5th generation aircraft, they also tested at least 2 6th generation aircraft, J-36, and that aircraft design is particularly unique, basically because it is supposed to be having 3 engines instead of 2. But this report also brings out, for the engines part, they are still dependent on a few other countries like Russia, Ukraine, etc. So while there are improvements in towards the 6th generation aircraft, the shipbuilding they have talked about, the Type 54B, which is a bigger frigate than the 54A, which was there earlier, with better capabilities, etc. However, for certain niche technologies, they are still dependent on other countries. That is the other thing. As far as dependence is concerned, the list of dependencies have been given on which country where they are depending on Russia. They are also depending on aerospace capabilities. So these are issues I think that we need to keep in mind as far as this is concerned. In addition to that, they also announced a KJ-3000 AVAC, Airborne Early Warning and Control Aircraft, which has been tested out. So which is on a Y-20B platform, the transport aircraft platform. So these are developments that are taking place pretty fast. Developments can take place, but how much of it is being absorbed within the PLA is the one which will determine whether these are effective or otherwise. So on that, they have talked about the exercises in this report. What are the exercises that have been done is something that has been mentioned. Another point I found in this report is there is a repetition. The repetition of this, the exercises that are being carried out, they're covered in Taiwan, they're covered elsewhere again. So there is frequent repetition of items I find in this report. Notwithstanding that, what they have come out clearly is the PLA is now looking at joint warfare capabilities. You were talking about earlier multi-domain precision warfare capability. That is what they are trying to work towards. Now, the problem was when the 2016 reforms came in, at that time they were working independently service-wise. Thereafter, what they did, they tried to bring in jointness into the system. Now, the jointness itself is still going on. It's not completely joint as far as this is concerned. After this, they have to come up to an integrated joint operations model. And then they have to go for multi-domain precision warfare. So I would say the multi-domain precision warfare capability at this point is still evolving in the PLA. It is not fully there. It is going to take at least 5 to 7 years for them to completely master this. Having said this, the exercises that they have mentioned in this the Western Theater Command, they are talking about Army and Air doing things jointly, which means that you need to face tomorrow if something happens in Aksai Chin or Arunachal Pradesh or in the middle sector or Sikkim, you will have to face a force which is actually doing jointly the planning and the operations between 3 things. 1, the Army, 2, the Air Force, and 3, the Rocket Force. So, and of course, this will be supported by the other 3 services that they created last year, breaking up the strategic support force. So that is the way you would have to see this entire thing, and you'll have to be prepared to face PLA doing operations using all this in a template.
You very rightly pointed out about the joint warfare capabilities of China. So, Ambassador Kantha, I would like to bring you in. China's coercion tactics and techniques have become more nuanced. As you were also talking about various joint sword exercises which was done in order to trouble Taiwan and encircling Taiwan. And those were the areas where they really tried to experiment with their jointness, because Army was there was Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, all of them were there, and the cyber, in the latest one, cyber was also used, and the drones were also there. So these exercises are becoming more and more nuanced as they go on. They had also tried to do with Russia what you call a combined bomber patrol over the Bering Sea, and they entered Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone also. So their coercion is increasing not only in South East Asia but also other places. But coming to Taiwan, what are your views? Will they maintain the status quo as within 2-3 years, or they will try to take over Taiwan?
That's a very big question, Roshan. I'll just come to that. But if you permit, I just wanted to make one point which has been discussed in the report quite a bit, and which I believe has a lot of implications for us. And that is, deployment of technology. Because in many ways, Xi Jinping has a technology obsession. And this is true both in civilian domain in terms of economic development, as also in case of PLA modernization. So China is moving ahead quite rapidly towards adoption of commercial artificial intelligence, large language models, dual use space and ISR assets, and most importantly, their military civil fusion MCF program, which is really central to its modernization. It's not just a buzzword for them, but this is a core aspect of their military modernization program. So seamless manner in which technology is being transferred, and that's true of some of the most cutting edge areas like artificial intelligence or autonomous vehicles or use of or ISR and space. So I think these things have big implications for us, and we need to study them very closely. I know that General Narasimham was doing that when he was heading MEA think tank, but in outside government, I think we need to pay more attention to that. Coming to your question about Taiwan, I would not like to engage in any crystal gazing, but I would like to point out some trends which are very apparent. And one trend is that, especially since Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, which provided China a pretext or opportunity to sort of start doing a few things it wasn't doing earlier, and creating new normal, which became base for more, escalation down the road. For instance, regular crossing of median line in Taiwan Strait, and we have just seen, a few days ago, this was possibly the largest, military maneuver they carried out around Taiwan. Simulation. Actually, it's more than simulation now of embargo. They are doing it in very specific terms, and they are not really getting any serious pushback from anyone, apart from some odd statements issued by Western countries. China is able to keep moving up this escalation ladder in terms of its coercive pressure tactics in military domain and in economic domain, but more so here in military domain. Now, what's going to happen in next 2 to 3 years? While I'll be reluctant to speculate, but my hunch is that we are not about going to see any kind of major kinetic action by PLA against Taiwan. They will continue ratcheting up pressure on Taiwan, but stop short of a big military action. And if you look at the US NSS 2025, Now, this is one area where certain signals have been conveyed that there'll be continuity in terms of maintenance of strategic ambiguity, but also, developing wherewithal to deter Chinese, military action against Taiwan. And the additional point is that much greater pressure is now being put on Japan, in particular, to contribute to that effort. So I will see continuance of these trends, while one cannot rule out some limited action on part of PLA as part of this moving up the escalation ladder. But I really doubt that Xi Jinping will take the risk of undertaking a major military, action against Taiwan over the next 2 to 3 years.
General Narasimhan, I would also like to ask you your views regarding Taiwan, because Taiwan, they have increased their exercise, the Chinese have increased their exercises, and they are gaining operational advantage in terms of the joint exercises in working in a multi-domain operations, as also they're improving the command and control. So what is the basic objective of all these things? Second, I want to ask you is in the core interests, this time the report also says about Arunachal Pradesh. So what do you make of that? And further, the PLA ground and aviation forces in the Western Theatre Command have conducted live fire and mobility exercises within high altitude, probably preparing for mountainous conflict contingencies. So, what is your assessment of these exercises? Do you see any changes in the Western Theatre Command with respect to infrastructure build-up, or as well as the deployment of weapon profiles?
See, on Taiwan, if you look at the national security strategy that they brought out, it talked about US doesn't support any unilateral change of status quo, which is existing at this point in time. That is one thing that came up in the national security strategy. On Taiwan, in this report, they have said compared to the previous year, 2024, in 2024, there were 1641 incursions, 1,641 incursions. Whereas in this year, they say the incursions have gone up to 3,067, which is almost double. Okay. Yeah, that is one thing. The second thing that they've talked about is they are unsure of PLA's capability to carry out an operation against Taiwan, is what this report says. Okay, that is one. The 2027 is a Davidson window. Admiral Philip Davidson, in his deposition, he mentioned this, and thereafter it was given the term Davidson window. However, many of the Americans themselves have actually now stopped talking about China invading Taiwan in 2027. They are actually thinking that they will do blockade, etc. Even in this report, there are pictures of the blockade. Everything is given around Taiwan. So it appears that they seem to have downscale the threat from China to Taiwan in the next couple of years. Having said that, they've also mentioned there have been increasing pressure being put on by the Coast Guard on Chinman, Matsu, and other islands. And also the psychological warfare being carried out when they were doing this by dropping leaflets, etc. on these islands. It is futile to defend these islands, etc., etc. So it is a combination of pressure that is being put on Taiwan, is something that we all understand. And it is for the Taiwanese to protect themselves against this. There is also a paragraph on Taiwan, how they have to defend themselves in this report. It talks about they're increasing their drills, they're increasing their the conscription duration from 4 months to 1 year, and the kind of training that is being imparted to people in terms of using stingers, etc. I think they have learned this lesson from Ukraine. So these are the kind of things that Taiwan is doing to prepare itself for against this. So putting all this together, and in all the exercises that you talk about in this report, I was looking for one component that was missing. And that component is the marine and the infantry that was taking part of all these exercises. They have said ships have taken part, aircraft has taken part, the Ro-Ro vessels are taking part, everything they have said. But all these things put together cannot actually capture territory. For capturing territory, you need boots on ground, and that is the infantry that you need to carry. Okay, you can say Marines are there, otherwise there. This report also talks about the airborne corps having certain amount of components, but also the Marine brigades, 8 brigades are there. But these are inadequate kind of troops if you want to capture Taiwan. So they have to build up that capability. The report also says they are building up that capability. But I think by 2027 will be a very ambitious time frame to actually put together for a PLA offensive against Taiwan. The second question that you talked about, the core interest, Arunachal being the core interest. In fact, I had exchanged notes with Master Kant on this a little while earlier, yesterday, day before. We are trying to find Chinese writings on this, nominating them as core interest, but I couldn't find any. Okay, they have said that the Sangnan, that is the southern Tibet, is actually part of their territory, is what they are saying. But the core interest is the word that we are looking for. I'm not able to get it. I'm sure Master Kant also will support me on this. We have been trying to locate that writing. We have not been able to do it. There have been saying that it's part of our territory. Tibet is part of our territory. Sangnan is part of Tibet, and so it's part of our territory. It's all the same. Sovereignty, territorial integrity, all is fine. But the issue is sovereignty, territorial integrity goes for every place in China. So this is a word that we are looking at in Chinese writings. I have not been able to locate it. If any of your audience locates it, I'll be happy to receive it from them. The other thing is about the ground and aviation forces that you talked about in Western Theatre Command. In my earlier intervention, I had mentioned this. In the Western Theatre Command, they have clearly said that the ground forces and the aviation and the air forces have been doing joint kind of training, etc. There's one instance in 2021, they also carried out a joint air defense exercise between the ground forces and the air force. So there are many instances of the jointness. There are also reports of advanced equipment getting inducted for high altitude, like your light tanks, like your PCL 181 that this report talks about, the artillery guns. All those new equipment is also getting inducted. In addition, this report also talks about the infrastructure that is getting made in Tibet and other areas. So you find that a combination of all this is increasing the capabilities of PLA in the Western Theatre Command, which India is facing. So to that extent, on all fronts, infrastructure, equipment procurement, as well as equipment manufacturing within the country, induction of that modern equipment, drone warfare, all these things have to be integrated in our system to ensure that we are ready to face any kind of action that we need to go through in the northern borders.
Ambassador Kantha, before we start taking your question answers session, India, China, they are improving their relationship as far as this thing is concerned. But you spoke about the core Arunachal being taken as a core. They have not mentioned it anywhere. And I think they may be guarded, because then we can also change our stance on Tibet. I mean, your views on that, and what India needs to do as far as diplomacy is concerned and other areas which you feel that we need to work on.
Roshan, on this issue of the DoD report, incidentally, the report is coming from US DoD. Though now there's no US DoD, there's Department of War. Now, this reference to certain areas claimed by China, including Arunachal Pradesh, being part of core interest. Ajahn Narasimham and I, in fact, the last few days, as you mentioned, we have been exchanging notes and just trying to figure out if there is any official document which refers to Arunachal Pradesh or Changnan, South Tibet, being part of China's core interests. And neither of us could locate any such document. But I would like to add a couple of things there. One, the way they define core interests has become somewhat open-ended. As you know, core interests are different components, but one component is territorial integrity and sovereignty of China. So there, they don't need to identify specific areas where they believe that some territory which they claim was part of China needs to be reunified with China. There is a degree of ambiguity, but if you look at comments made by Xi Jinping, for instance, his comments have been quite categorical, not ceding an inch of territory, historical inheritance of China being preserved. That in a way reduces room for give and take. Yet, I can tell you from my own experience during boundary negotiations with China, they were not demanding that India sort of give to them so-called Changnan or South Tibet. Essentially, they were asking for substantive adjustments by India in eastern sector, rather than whole of the claimed area being returned. So that flies against the narrative of core interest. If the entire claimed area is core interest, then a negotiated settlement is foreclosed. But that's not what Chinese have done. Only thing their demands are exorbitant, which we can't possibly consider. Now, coming to your question, sorry, what was the question you posed to me directly, Roshan?
Anything you feel we need to improve on as far as India-China relation is concerned?
Well, in a specific context of this report, we discussed earlier that there are very important implications for us. So when we are working out our asymmetric deterrence capabilities, there are a number of factors we need to take into account. There is a reference to China's collaboration with Pakistan, though nothing like what we have been saying, no operational collaboration during Operation Sindoor, because that was not 2024. This report covers only 2024. But that's one additional factor we need to take into account. Because to my mind, the kind of battlefield collusion we saw during that 87-hour military operation vis-a-vis Pakistan contained something unprecedented, Sino-Pak military collaboration at operational level. Apart from that, what comes out from the report, for instance, nuclear forces, it's not just a question of expansion of nuclear forces, but also certain doctrinal ambiguity, which has crept in. Talk of early warning counter-strike, which is akin to launch and warning. Many of these things have implications for our own second strike capability in a strategic domain, for instance. Developments which this report brings out in terms of force posture, sustained forward deployment abilities, what we need to do, in response thereto, or for instance, economic security, weaponization of upstream choke points, something which is becoming increasingly, relevant for us because we were subjected to that. Uh, in fact, it's still continuing in terms of denial of critical equipment like rare earth magnets, where I believe supplies are still constrained and subject to extensive documentation and user certification. So there are, I think, for us, need to take on board these developments, even though they don't contain anything new, because this report limits itself only to 2024. Earlier reports used to sort of wade little bit into the next year also. This time they haven't done. But yet, some trends are highlighted which have a very important bearing on our own threat perception vis-a-vis China.
Narasimham, are we doing enough as far as capability gap between the two countries are concerned? Would you like to highlight that, or some areas where we need to work before we take questions?
See, the first thing is, I've been saying this in my earlier interactions also, that, we should stop comparing or contesting the numbers. Basically, you can't actually bridge that gap in that manner. But what we need to do is to create capabilities to deter China from doing anything to us. And to do that, you don't have to go equipment on equipment and then compare and then see how much you need to get there. That is one point that I wanted to mention to you. Second, we have also been undergoing certain amount of organizational changes. Like, for example, you would have seen that Bhairav battalions coming up. It was in the news a couple of days ago. So these are battalions which are actually trying to do the kind of drone warfare, etc., which is evolving. And they are supposed to be working on that and then see as to how they can use these things. And the private industry in India has actually started moving up the ladder as far as manufacturing is concerned. Bharat Forge and others are really doing a good job of actually making our guns, etc. And the light tank, that Zorawar tank that we are talking about, that is undergoing trials at this point in time. And there are other issues like air defense is something that we have been closely looking at ever since Op Sindoor again. So there are a number of things that are actually being done at this point in time. So that is something which we need to keep in mind. It is an ongoing process. It is never a complete process. It is an ongoing process. We need to keep pushing up the ladder all the time. And I think the effort is in the right direction at this point in time. My request to your audience is, do not compare equipment to equipment, numbers to numbers. Bean count doesn't win wars. If that was the case, Americans should have won all the wars that they have fought, which they have not. So it is something that you need to keep in mind, that there is more things than the weapon and equipment. Of course, they are very much required. Technology is required. The weapons and equipment are required. But the fact of the matter is, if the wars could be won by that, then the Americans should have won all the wars that they have fought. They have not. So therefore, there are more things that you need to look into as to how to deter China from doing anything adverse against us. And I'm sure we are thinking rightly. And also we are looking at Atmanirbhar very clearly. And I think it is a matter of time before we attain that date.
Lakshay, he wants to ask how much of the PLA modernization is oriented towards India, and how should we avoid misreading China's priorities along LAC? And he also says that Xi's tightening grip on PLA, how is that impacting operational and tactical capabilities? Narasimham, you can start.
Okay, okay. The PLA modernization is actually not oriented towards any country. Please look at that, because the PLA's tasking has evolved over a period of time. From an internal looking organization, if you look at the military strategy that they have talked about in this and that operational directions that they have given in this report, you look at the PLA's role is actually expanding regional and global wise. So the modernization has to cater for that kind of a capability by 2049. So therefore, I would say it is not India-centric in general. But if you look at the kind of equipment they are inducting into the high altitude terrain opposite Ladakh, etc., there is a component which actually talks about all terrain capability. In that, the high altitude area opposite India also comes into play. So to that extent, yes, there is some amount of effort to modernize the ground forces and the air force, keeping India in mind as in the southwestern theater. So that is something that is always there. The other thing is there is no priority along LAC as far as we are concerned. As far as we are concerned, we need to protect the LAC all along its length of 3,448 kilometers, 3,488 kilometers. So that is something that we need to be doing. So if you just prioritize and say, okay, I'll put my troops here, not put the troops there, then you will be vulnerable at some places. So those plannings are already been done, and therefore we don't have to worry about that, because that is the bread and butter of the armed forces that are actually guarding that line of actual control, which they are doing in and day out. I think I've answered that question. If there's anything more, I'll come back.
Okay. Alia asked 9 pages on Taiwan, but how do we differentiate between capability development and an actual intent to move on Taiwan?
So should I go ahead or Ambassador go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
On Taiwan, you see, they have said 9 pages. I agree. I mean, it's in 2 parts, and somewhere later also they have come and covered this. But the issue that you need to keep in mind is how they assess the capability of the PLA to do this. That is where the problem comes. Because unlike Russia, Ukraine, where Russia could just walk into Ukraine because there's a land border which you could do, amphibious operations are really terrible to undergo. It's a very, very difficult operation to perform. It requires a coordination of all the 3 services, including cyber, space, and everything else, to be integrated properly. So to that kind of capability is something that is still not, at the moment, it's evolving. I wouldn't say it's not there. It is still evolving. It is not to the optimal levels which they would like to have to take it to the. This report also mentions about how much of carrying capacity of the Air Force is concerned. You don't have much of carrying capability as far as this is concerned. You can carry 1 division, 1.5 division. That's all they can carry. If that is the case, and plus amphibious capability put together comes to about 2.5 divisions, this will be very grossly inadequate for any kind of operation that they have to plan towards Taiwan. So capabilities are building up. They are actually trying to create that capability, but they're still not there, is what I would like to say.
There is one question. What does Madura?
Roshan, if you permit,
yes,
just like to come in on that question on whether anything is India specific.
Yes. What are the shortcomings of the report?
First, I would like to fully endorse point Jan Narasimham made earlier, that we never seek parity with China, whether in conventional domain or in strategic domain, because that will be fool's errand, given the fact that China's economy is nearly 5 times as big as ours, and their threat perception is not primarily India focused. Their number one adversary or target is USA, in fact. Yet, when China develops certain capabilities, there are some capabilities which one can say, can be deployed against India, possibly not against USA. Just to give you 2 examples. One, what they're doing in terms of, upgrading their troop force induction capabilities in Western theater. These, for instance, they've decided they're constructing this rail link from Hotan to Shigatse, from Xinjiang to Tibet, along China-Nepal border. This will cut through, Aksai Chin. A second road link, G695, is again coming through Aksai Chin. A whole lot of new airfields which have come up. In fact, it's a long list of things they are doing there, which are clearly, meant to be deployed against us. They have no use against anyone else. That's one. Secondly, there are areas where capabilities they have developed so far are not effective as far as USA is concerned. But they will be very effective vis-a-vis India. For instance, when it comes to China's strategic bombers, they don't have real capability to pierce US defense setup. But they can do that against India. So that capability is ready for deployment against India, but perhaps not so ripe for deployment against USA. Same is true in nuclear domain on certain, counterforce capabilities which are conventional, that means using conventional weapons to take out nuclear establishments. That cannot be deployed against USA, but they have developed very deliberately certain capabilities which can be used against us. And plus generally, upgradation of their capabilities in various domains, whether or not they're India specific. And General Sim is right. PLA doesn't necessarily look for modernization. Keeping in mind a specific country, with exception of USA. USA, they do keep in mind when they are developing capabilities, but they are very relevant, very germane for India. There's no doubt about it.
General Dushyant Singh has commented asymmetry needs to be overcome through strategically and tactical measures till we reduce the gap. HR is our strength, and that should be leveraged. You can comment on that. And related to this, and as one more interesting question is this, the last one we'll take. What does Maduro's abduction convey regarding US assessment of China? Does it convey a more confrontationist attitude or a tacit agreement between great powers, regional spheres of influence?
Regarding space of influence.
Yeah.
Ambassador can go on this.
When you look at prioritization of their Western theater or Latin America in their national security strategy. And clearly it's backed up by a whole lot of preparation even before NSS was released on 4th of December last year, because preparation for military action against Venezuela and taking out Maduro, this was in the pipeline for last several months. Here, one stated objective of the Trump corollary to Monroe Doctrine is to ensure that outside power gets to exercise influence in USA's proximity in any significant manner. In fact, this applies even to Chinese control of oil resources in Venezuela, for instance. So when they have not named China, but clearly China is the target, because this is one country which had invested a lot in expanding its footprint in South America. And the USA has conveyed a clear message that they would like to roll it back. And to some extent, they're doing it in Venezuela. You'll recall that at one point of time, Venezuela's loans, debt owed by Venezuela to China was in excess of $100 billion. And good part of it has been paid back either through oil supplies or through restructuring of loan. But future, Americans will not allow perhaps China to get that kind of access to hydrocarbon resources of Venezuela. And I suspect this is not going to be a one-off, example of Trump trying to exercise dominance in Western Hemisphere. Whether it will lead to some kind of sphere of influence taking shape, I have my doubts about it. Because I really doubt that US defense establishment is prepared to cede East Asia, let alone Asia as a whole, as China's sphere of influence. And likewise, countries like Japan and India will not sign on to any such arrangement. So I think parceling out large, tracts of geography as spheres of influence of country X, country Y, I think is a little passé now, because other countries also have agency, and world is far too complicated for that.
General Narasimham, any last comments? Yes.
4 points I will try and finish within 1 minute. First one is on the technology. Okay, they are looking at biotech in a big way. They're talking about brain-computer interface, etc.
Yes.
That is something which is important. Second is solid-state batteries. They also understand rare earths are going to become a problem at some point in time. So they're shifting towards solid-state batteries which can last longer and give more power. That is the second thing. Third, on the chips, there is a paragraph on chips which talks about how they have used shell companies, etc., to gather enough chips that are required. Like, for example, Huawei has gone in for million kind of chips which have been got by other means to do this. So they go all out when they have to do this, and that is something that we need to keep in mind. The third thing is on the China-US comparison. I don't think China will at any point in time want to get into a physical kind of a combat with China, with the US. But what they would like to do is enhancing the missile capabilities. Ambassador Kantha talked about the nuclear capabilities. In this report, they have also talked about 10 kiloton kind of weapons.
Yes,
low
weapons. Yes.
Low yield. That will go for counter force kind of capabilities, yes, combined with the missile capability. They have a missile for every range in the world. So combined with that is the other one. The third point is on the early warning capabilities that they have talked about. They said in this report that in 90 seconds after the missile is being launched, they'll be able to detect it and then react to it. So these are the kind of capabilities that they are trying to bring up. So these will be we need to be extremely careful on this. And they've also filled up 100 of the silos in the Xinjiang, those 3 silo fields that they have been creating. They have actually filled in about 100 plus silos. We don't know whether they're conventional, nuclear tip, tactical nuclear tip, MIRV, we don't know what they are. Yes. So this is the kind of ambiguity which Ambassador Kantha talked about is actually coming into this domain. And that is making things far more difficult to actually react to.
Actually, what you pointed out was very right, because they are going towards first use. Because all these things, what they are developing. Yes, launch on warning.
Launch on warning, not first use.
Yes. Yeah. Launch on warning also, from no first use, they are going towards launch on warning.
Yes, launch on warning, they already have that thing. So they say that they have no first use, but it's not going to be working that way. And if you launch on warning, it's as good as first use. And you also spoke very correctly about the chips, what they're trying to have, even the legacy chips, what they want to do. It's all, there's a pattern in their progress, what they are doing. So thank you so much, General Narasimham and Ambassador Kantha, for discussing in detail the report. And it highlighted what are their plus points and negatives. And we really are thankful to you for this podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Roshan. Thank you, Narasimham.